Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where this morning Marvel Entertainment tweeted that they have a big announcement tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tomorrow is Thursday, January 26th. And immediately, all of us movie fans were like, Phase 4 announcement, Black Panther, Captain Marvel director. But then very quickly, a number of BTT viewers who are also gamers tweeted me back because I retweeted Marvel's tweet and was like, and they were like, oh, Grace, Square Enix, which makes the Kingdom Hearts games, also said there's a big announcement tomorrow at the exact same time that Marvel Entertainment did. And the rumor is that Marvel is going to announce, along with Square Enix, that Marvel is joining Kingdom Hearts. There will be a Kingdom Hearts world. And apparently the rumor also, because I did some digging after hearing that, and then it's also that Star Wars might be joining Kingdom Hearts as well. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Kingdom Hearts, it's a long-running video game where there are some human characters who go through worlds interacting with different Disney characters. You know how everybody likes to say, is there a princess shared cinematic universe? Well, in Kingdom Hearts, there is. All the Disney characters coexist. It's a little bit like Disney Infinity in that way, but Disney Infinity actually was discontinued last year in 2016 because it didn't do particularly well. And they added both Star Wars and Marvel to that as well. Although I have to say, I purchased Disney Infinity because it seemed like so much fun from the commercials, and it was impossible to figure out how to play it. You know, like I just ran around as Mickey. I got it as a Christmas gift for my whole family one year. I was like, family activity. And then we played it for about, like, I'd say a couple hours, and we were like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And we couldn't figure it out by looking it up online, and it was not fun. So I'm not surprised that Disney Infinity was discontinued. But Kingdom Hearts has a long success, success factor. It's been very popular for a very long time, and so they're looking to inject Marvel and Star Wars into that. I do think that they should have been more clear that the announcement would be video game centric, because I think there are going to be a couple of people who are a little disappointed tomorrow. But hopefully not. Hopefully now I've prepared you for what that release is actually about. We'll see. But it's interesting to see, Disney, move Marvel more into the gaming community. We've just talking a lot about DC's, Warner Brothers games. I did the Batman, the new Injustice 2 trailer, the Robin reveal gameplay, and I'm so honored because Ed Boon, who directs the Injustice video game, retweeted out my reaction, and Warner Brothers just totally dominates in the video game market. I had a couple of Marvel fans say, oh, there are popular Marvel games, but I don't think at the level of Injustice or Batman Arkham, where the trailers get that kind of attention online, because they have such great story trailers and they do character redesigns that they get the attention of people who aren't even gamers like myself, because we're curious to see what they're doing with the character. And also the Batman Arkham games, and I think even to some degree Injustice, have a history of influencing the movies and other areas of the DC at Warner Brothers. For instance, Harley Quinn, her popularity escalated even further through the Batman Arkham games, and they had her, they went with the blonde ponytails with the color dip at the end, and that's what David Ayer did a variation on for the live-action movie. I think that the DCEU is very highly influenced by the video games in terms of at least visuals. So the question is, does Marvel and maybe even Star Wars want to get a little bit more into that area? I'd actually prefer them to do games like that, have games that are more story-oriented and have that kind of appeal. But maybe, Kevin Feige is very good at keeping the continuing story locked down, and maybe he feels if it spreads out over too many different mediums, he's going to be stuck. He already, divested himself from the TV. He was like, yeah, I don't want to play with you guys. And he got Disney to separate him from the rest of Marvel. Marvel Films, Marvel Studios is isolated. It does not have to deal with Marvel Comics or TV. Kevin Feige reports directly to Alan Horn at Disney Theatrical. Good for Kevin Feige. That's interesting. He deserves that kind of autonomy, but it's certainly very interesting. But why would they want to put Marvel and to some degree Star Wars in Kingdom Hearts, right? My feeling is that particularly Star Wars, they're not very strong in the Asian markets, and Kingdom Hearts is a very popular video game, particularly, like, let's say in Japan, right? So if they can get if they can have people identify with these characters through their interactions, maybe the movies will do better at the box office there. It's it's something that Kevin Tsujihara, again at Warner Brothers, talked about. He's been pushing for a shortened window between the theatrical release and the streaming release. And he said, at the end of the day, we just want people to see the movie because it drives so many products and drives the brand, which is not only merchandise, but theme park experiences, video games. So they just want you to see the movie. And think about how well Frozen did in Japan. Frozen made almost $300 million in Japan. That's huge. So if they can up the profile of these characters in, particularly in Asia, there's a lot of money to be made there. But it's interesting. It's very interesting indeed. And let's see if that is the announcement tomorrow. But I'm curious to what you guys think of it, particularly if you're in the gaming community. And do you think that Marvel and Star Wars fit in Kingdom Hearts? It has a real Disney kind of feel in terms of Disney animation. Although they also have some Final Fantasy characters in there. So I guess that it wouldn't be too jarring to have Marvel characters start being in there, but I wonder what their character designs will look like. That's what really interests me. I love alternate universes, so I love seeing people play with these characters. So if Marvel could get in on that a little bit, I think, does Marvel need any help though? I don't know. We'll see. It's a question do Marvel films, are they only there to help others, or are these two-way streets where other mediums can help Marvel films? Maybe Kevin Feige should be open to that to some degree. He's really not right now, but maybe he should be. Oh, all right, very interesting. All right, so let's go to the second story of the day, talking about branding. That's kind of a little bit of an overarching theme in today's episode. But I'm talking about Paris Jackson and the Rolling Stone cover story that debuted yesterday. That's the focus of this story. I was very impressed with how she has branded herself. And I tweeted about that. And I said, whoever's handling the branding for Paris Jackson is a genius, because this is quite a launch of a celebrity, so to speak. And I had a couple of you say, well, what about, could you explain about branding a celebrity, etc.? So I'm happy to do it. And it's a slow news day. So let's talk about Paris Jackson, who trended on Twitter for several hours yesterday with not only this story breaking, but some fabulous photos that accompanied it. And as you can see, a really amazing cover. I think that, and also the article was titled Life After Neverland, which I think puts kind of a positive fantasy spin on her experience, but she did get, real in the article, talking about some abuse and also multiple suicide attempts, which I think in today's pop culture landscape, the more real you are, the more honest you are, and have no filter, I think the faster you make a connection with people. And I think people just look at how well reality TV does this these days, and how the Kardashians rule on social media, and they are totally open books. So I think that Paris Jackson is certainly taking a page from their books, very cleverly so. So basically, a person has a brand, right? Especially if they're a celebrity first and a talent second, which I think is the situation with Paris Jackson. I think they're right now looking to make her a name and then see what they can use that momentum to get. I don't know if she's going to be in music. That seems like a natural fit because of Michael Jackson, her father. But we don't know if she has any ability. But she could certainly be an actor, although with auto-tune today, I guess anyone could also be a singer. But then also she could even get herself a reality show. So I think they just want to get her on the board, get a lot of chatter, and then see what kind of opportunities come their way, or that they can pursue successfully. So branding, again, is particularly important when someone's a celebrity first and a talent second, right? So this was the launch of Paris Jackson. Paris Jackson has been off the grid for a while as she's grown up. But as you can see, part of this launch was the surprise, the debut of her new look. She looks significantly different than she ever has before. She's gone blonde, she's lost a considerable amount of weight, and this is a very refined, polished styling that she's never also had before. This is professional styling. Someone has helped her with her look. And she looks great. I think it plays a little bit off of the current popularity of Suicide Squad. I think you see those elements. And I think it has a softness as well as an edge to it. And I think it's both male and female friendly. She also made a somewhat controversial comment about identifying as Black. But I think that the African-American community drives a lot of pop culture these days. And so I think that also was something that, Paris Jackson is trying to, and I think not only because of, again, being raised by Michael Jackson, who ironically himself, I don't believe, identified as Black, but it's it's interesting to see, can she span those two ethnicities, those two fandoms, right? And especially today, so many people talk about, white kids, identifying as black, even if their father isn't Michael Jackson, right? So it's a really interesting situation, and it certainly sparks conversation. I think some people were like, what? But I think Paris Jackson still has a little bit of leeway because of the tragedy of her upbringing. So anyway, I think this was really a smart debut. I think it's one of the best debuts I've ever seen of branding and, having someone arrive. And, make no mistake, this isn't because Paris Jackson decided she wanted to talk to the public, or she felt it was time to interact with people or tell them a little bit about Michael Jackson. No, Paris Jackson has done this because she wants to have a career. So keep an eye on some developments. She'll be doing something in the near future. She'll either, music, acting, or a reality show, for sure. There's no reason to have that kind of a launch if that's not what you're looking to do. But this is the thing you're going to see. I think there are a couple of celebrity children that are coming up that'll have the same situation. I think the Jolie Pitt kids have been groomed for this, particularly Shiloh from day one. Her fluid gender situation that she has going on. A lot of people talking about whether or not that really should have been discussed publicly, as Angelina Jolie did. But, that's definitely branding for that kid. Definitely branding, especially because it's so pronounced. And I think also Zahara, I think both of the, particularly the two girls of the Jolie Pitt family, they're going to have to need, and also because Angelina Jolie is so publicity savvy, she's going to be launching those kids probably in the next few years as well. All right, so that's the first two stories. The third story is about Oscar power dynamics changing. This was very interesting. Harvey Weinstein, of course, used to dominate the Oscars. So did Scott Rudin. But they've both faltered in recent years, Harvey particularly this year, with both Gold and The Founder being totally shut out. So it's gotten to the point where, it used to be if Harvey Weinstein wanted to buy your movie to distribute, that you were really lucky. But I don't believe that's the case anymore. And some new power players have emerged, which we're going to discuss in just a moment. But also what's interesting is that Fox Searchlight ended up with only 3 nominations, all for Jackie. And of course, they were set to dominate with The Birth of a Nation prior to the Nate Parker scandal. So it's interesting. This has been a particularly tumultuous Oscar season. So Lionsgate leads the pack with 26 nominations. That's amazing. They haven't had this much Oscar success since Crash got Best Picture back in 2004, and of course was much maligned for doing so. It wasn't considered, I think, by many people a legit win. More just an expert playing of the political landscape when it comes to Oscar votes. But this, everybody's very supportive of Lionsgate's nominees this year. But they have La La Land, which has a record-tying 14 nominations, along with Titanic, and I think All About Eve. That's amazing. Hacksaw Ridge, Hell or High Water, which is a co-release with CBS Films, and then also Deepwater Horizon has 2 technical nominations. But the first 2 pictures, La La Land and Hacksaw Ridge, are particularly notable because they're films that nobody else really wanted to release. They were risks that Lionsgate took. La La Land being a musical, with no discernible musical talent attached. It's not like Lin-Manuel wanted to make a musical. And then also Hacksaw Ridge, of course, from Mel Gibson, who has been, his name has been mud for quite some time, but he's officially back. So Lionsgate gambled and won big time. And it's interesting because Lionsgate has been having a lot of problems. This could be a good year for them. If they can launch Power Rangers successfully, they'll have had a good 2017. But they've really faltered post the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, didn't end on a good note. They have not been able to bring it back, at least so far. Talks for a theme park have stalled. And also Now You See Me, while the sequel did well overseas, that didn't become the franchise they hoped it would either. So they've been a little bit of a problem, but this is great news for them, these Oscar nominations. This is also great news for Paramount, which can say that 2016 wasn't a total wash because they certainly didn't do well at the box office. Their highest grossing film for the year was Star Trek Beyond, which only made it into the low 20s in terms of ranking for the year at the worldwide box office. But they got 18 Oscar nominations yesterday, and they were the second biggest distributor. Every year they rank how many nominations each distributor gets, and so Lionsgate came in first, followed by Paramount. So Brad Gray, who's actually fighting for his job right now, they want to replace him, can certainly point to this. Arrival supplied most of the nominees. Also Fences is theirs, and Florence Foster Jenkins. And then it's also worth noting that Amazon is on the board with 7 nominations, 6 for Manchester by the Sea, and they're major nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, I think Michelle Williams, Best Supporting Actress. That's amazing. That's really fantastic for a streaming service. I mean, they have arrived, and streaming services have already broken through with television awards, quite to the point they dominate. But for Manchester by the Sea to do so well is not only a huge win for Amazon, and it's going to help them with festival negotiations this year, because they can get a movie to the finish line. Well, not quite the finish line, because we have to see who actually wins. But I think Manchester will. We'll see what happens with Casey Affleck after this Constance Wu controversy. I hope. We'll see. That's a whole other story. But anyway, I think this is also going to light a huge fire under Netflix, because they got to get on the board. They did well with documentaries this year, but they need to do better with their motion pictures. They're going to try and go for blockbusters with Bright, the David Ayer, Max Landis, Will Smith movie that's currently being filmed. That's their big play, but they're going to, make no mistake, they're going to want to try and get into the award season narratively as well, because they finally, I think, have a steady footing with television, with Stranger Things, The Crown. They had House of Cards and Orange Is the New Black, but they didn't have anything else for a while. But now I think they're really set. They shut out HBO at the Golden Globes. It was amazing. But Netflix is going to look for them to be very aggressive in the film space starting now. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day, and the viewer question comes from Esther Lowen. Hello, Esther. And Esther says, Grace, how are you? I'm great, Esther. And then she says, Esther here. Esther, you are so awesome. I love the way you phrased it. And so she says, Esther here. Here's my question. Why do films want to be R-rated? Does that limit the audience? And someone wrote back, oh, Deadpool and Matrix say hello. And yes, they did do well. Deadpool and Matrix did well. And sometimes R-rated movies can do quite well, but they can't do as well as a PG-13 rated film. There are no R-rated, I don't believe, there aren't any R-rated $1 billion club movies, because the audience is just too limited. So here's the situation. I'll explain to you why an R rating is sometimes coveted, because Esther asked this question yesterday when we were talking about Logan now officially being rated R. So the sweet spot in Hollywood is still PG-13, because it allows for the widest audience. Now, the reason you want PG-13 and not PG or G is that those other ratings seem kind of lame, right? So it keeps you from having a certain amount of action, etc. It's a couple of bit of like some romantic aspects, and I think you're allowed a sprinkling of swear words in PG-13 as well. So PG-13 makes sure your movie doesn't seem like a baby movie, but it's still something that people feel comfortable. You get the family audience. The family audience is huge, because it guarantees you like at least 3 or 4 people going to see the film, and it's a huge multiple on ticket sales. Where other films maybe just a couple goes, right, or 1 person. So you want that family audience, and that's evidenced by how well animation is doing right now, which is driven by the family audience. So PG-13, yes, that's the ideal rating for a movie. But sometimes a movie does want an R rating. And why is that? Well, the reason they want an R rating is for branding and the image of the movie. And it's often to show that they didn't wimp out, that they're going there. And that's very much part of the ad campaign. Like, think about Deadpool and Logan. They're not just rated R, they're aggressively rated R. It's part of what they talk about when promoting the movie. They're like, go see Deadpool, go see Logan, they're rated R. It's a badge of honor. It's not a scarlet letter, right? Or just something that happens to be the case. Now, The Passion of the Christ is Logan's the most successful worldwide rated R film, and The Passion of the Christ is the most successful domestic. They're really tied. It's a difference of 7 million. But the reason The Passion of the Christ was such a big deal when it was rated R was because Mel Gibson didn't want to hold back on the gore. And I have to tell you, it was very effective in getting across the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made. It's a great movie. I really love The Passion of the Christ. Extremely powerful. Mel Gibson, say what you will about him as a human being, but he is an incredibly talented filmmaker. But anyway, The Hangover also rated R. But that's because that's famous for being a raunchy movie. And if it's not rated R, then what's the point of The Hangover? Now, I will say, though, that I don't think that the Matrix movies need to be rated R. They've done quite well. I mean, back in the early 2000s, they were making huge numbers that would be impressive today. So you had the Matrix the first Matrix made 463.5 worldwide. The Matrix Reloaded, the second film, made 742.1 worldwide. That's not adjusted for inflation in 2003. That would be part of the $1 billion club today. And then it drops huge for the third one, just to show you how bad the third one was. It was bad. The Matrix Revolutions, which is actually the lowest grossing one at $427.3 million worldwide. That's phenomenal. There's rumors they want to bring the Matrix back, and I can guarantee you when it comes back, it'll probably be a PG-13 rated movie. Because I mean, looking back at the Matrix, people love the Matrix slowing down of time for the action sequences. That's what people want to see, and there's no reason for that to be R-rated. Why not get the more box office friendly PG-13 rating? And that's a perfect delineation. The Matrix doesn't need to be rated R to be cool, to get people excited about it. But Deadpool and Logan, I had problems with Deadpool. Actually, you know what? To tell you the truth, if Deadpool had not targeted itself again towards kids, I would not have minded that it was R-rated. And also because, a lot of the R rating I felt was in a sexual nature. But for Logan, I think that, Logan reminds me of like, Die Hard, Rambo, those kind of movies where you're like, it's fine. But, Logan needs to be rated R because that they promised us finally a gory Wolverine movie, because the comics are quite gory with Logan often, especially when he has like his standalone titles and like, big epic stories. So that's the situation. The question is being rated R help for a blockbuster? Smaller films, they don't mind being rated R, of course, because they never can hope to be super strong box office contenders anyway. And also sometimes if a film is supposed to be adult, again, it's part of the brand. Oh, this is an adult movie, it's rated R. But it's still, for the most part, unless being rated R is a good thing to have in the conversation about your film to prove, again, that it went there, that it's a badge of honor, that it's not holding back, I see no reason for a movie to be rated R unless it's that for that purpose. I think they should really continue to aim for the PG-13 rating because that's where the money is. And interestingly, I think a lot of R-rated content is done quite well on television. That's where a lot of I think R-rated content has really excelled in particular. Game of Thrones, very R-rated. And, HBO started it with really pushing the edge of the envelope in terms of sex, nudity, violence, and gore to say, this is why you should watch us and not network television or other cable, wimpy or cable networks. And everyone's tried to follow suit to some degree, particularly on Showtime and HBO. That's kind of like their thing. But again, it's part of the branding, right? And that's all very important. So think of it from a branding perspective, Esther. That's why films want to be rated R. And we'll see. Maybe someday we will get an R-rated film in the $1 billion club. With inflation and IMAX and 3D, I think, and also how close that Deadpool came, I think we're getting close. I think maybe the next year or so you will see, at least in the next 5 years, I think you will see an R-rated movie break through, especially if Fox continues to be so successful with them. All right, so maybe Justice League Dark should be rated R. That would be pretty cool, but I don't see that having that's not has any established characters in it, so I think that would be a hurdle they wouldn't want to give themselves at the box office. We'll see. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below today's top 3 stories, Esther's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.